Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'm Marinez, and today we're going to be breaking down each of the 45 presidents' biggest successes while in the Oval Office. So without further ado, let's begin. George Washington's biggest success was establishing a precedent for future presidents. Washington made the president a limited role and divided responsibilities to well-qualified cabinet members, kept the separation of powers, but acted as a safeguard against tyranny. John Adams' greatest success was the Convention of 1800, which was a treaty with France that prevented U.S. involvement in the French Revolutionary War, preventing war with France while maintaining good relations with the country. Although many would say that Jefferson's greatest success was the Louisiana Purchase, I would lean towards the First Barbary War, which was a quick, low-casualty war that had stopped the pirates who had been capturing, pillaging, and enslaving U.S. people on ships. If the issue was not tackled, thousands more Americans would likely be enslaved within a decade or two. The only good thing I think James Madison did as president was the building of the Cumberland Road, which built the first highway to link the western lands. I will also say his leadership during the War of 1812 was good, but it was also a war he himself caused, so I'm not going to give him much credit for that. James Monroe's biggest success were his treaties. The Rush-Bagot Treaty lowered the tensions between the USA and Britain by both withdrawing Navy units from the Great Lakes. Also, the Treaty of 1818, which solved border disputes with Britain, and the Russo-American Treaty, made it so Russia was not allowed to have any sovereign rule in North America. Monroe also got a pretty good deal to acquire Florida. John Quincy Adams' biggest success has to be his improvement of infrastructure in the U.S. Adams created the Naval Academy, as well as built long roads, railroad canals, and fixed the national road so that people could travel safely and effectively, as well as improving military strength. I'm very fond of how Jackson eliminated the national debt as president. The way he did it was in part because of the removal of the Indians and harsh tariffs, which were both very negative things. So I'd say his biggest success was instead negotiating favorable trade agreements with numerous countries, including Great Britain, the Ottoman Empire, Spain, and Russia. Martin Van Buren's biggest success has to be his handling of the Aroostook War, a war that started over a border dispute between New Brunswick, Canada, and Maine. Tensions were rising and the British began arresting American lumberjacks and the Americans arresting British lumberjacks, who they said crossed the border illegally to cut down trees. Van Buren calmly and swiftly ended this conflict through negotiating with the British that, if unhandled, could have turned into a small-scale war. William Henry Harrison did not get much done in his short 31 days in office. I like his plan to establish a national bank to provide stability for the economy, but for things he actually got done, his inauguration speech has to be his greatest accomplishment. It exuded strength and was an excellent display of unity in the country. John Tyler's biggest success was passing the Webster-Ashburn Treaty, which drew a clear line between Maine and Canada, resolving many disputes and potential wars. Additionally, it ended the slave trade in the high seas and ended slave trafficking off of African waters. Polk's tough negotiation got Britain to give up the Oregon Territory of modern-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Wyoming and Montana for free. That's right, F-R-E-E, free, to avoid a war, making it one of the best deals in American history. Zachary Taylor's plan to admit California and New Mexico as supersized free states, if done, would have been the biggest step towards ending slavery by any president before Lincoln. However, since his term came to an unfortunately quick end, he was not able to accomplish this. So instead, I would say Zachary Taylor's biggest success was the creation of the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty with Britain, which laid the groundwork for the eventual construction of the Panama Canal. Millard Fillmore's greatest success was his foreign policy accomplishments. Fillmore used his words to prevent Hawaii from being annexed by the French, got a payment settlement from Portugal, and also avoided conflict with Cuba that was pushed forward by much of the American public. There's not much going for Franklin Pierce in terms of successes, but I'd say his biggest success was the Gadsden Purchase, in which Pierce acquired 29,670 square miles of land, now part of Arizona and New Mexico. Buchanan's biggest success was his displacement of Brigham Young as governor, where Buchanan replaced Utah's murderous and polygamous governor with someone who was more sensible and would work with the American government. Abraham Lincoln's biggest success is obviously his actions regarding slavery. First, the Emancipation Proclamation, which legally freed all of the slaves in the Confederate States. Then through Lincoln's work to get the 13th Amendment passed that would make slavery constitutionally illegal. Andrew Johnson's biggest success was purchasing a massive moneymaker for cheap when he bought Alaska from Russia for only $7.2 million, or $157 million in today's money, but it was worth its weight in gold. In today's worth, the 33 million ounces of gold from Alaska made more than 54,000 times the purchase price in today's dollars, making over $85 billion in gold alone. Ulysses Grant's biggest success was his work in Reconstruction. Grant signed a law barring racial discrimination in the laws of the District of Columbia, which eliminated the qualifications of someone being white to vote, serve on a jury, or to hold an office in the District of Columbia. He also signed into law the Naturalization Act, which gave foreign black people U.S. citizenship, and got the states which were trying to hold out on adopting the 15th Amendment to adopt it into their state constitution. Not to mention the signing in support of the Civil Rights Acts of 1875 and him crushing the Ku Klux Klan. Rutherford B. Hayes' most successful actions were his use of the presidential veto, in which he vetoed the racist Chinese Exclusion Act, which would have banned all immigration from China, and the Appropriation Bill, which kept enforcement of several African American freedoms, including the right to vote. James Garfield did not get much done in his very short presidency, which is unfortunate given his strong support for the expansion of civil rights. But one good thing he did get done was the lowering of interest bonds, which reduced the bond rate to current inflation, saving taxpayers over $7 billion in today's money, or $10 million back then. In my opinion, Chester A. Arthur's greatest success was the passing of the Edmund Act, which made polygamy illegal federally throughout the United States of America. Cleveland had success in creating the Interstate Commerce Commission, which regulated railroads to ensure fair rates and to eliminate discrimination in the rates charged. This great consumer victory has to be Cleveland's greatest success. Benjamin Harrison's best success is the passing of the Sherman Antitrust Act that prohibits monopolies, price fixing, and other collusive practices that unreasonably restrain interstate or international trade to ensure free and fair competition, so that prices for consumers are more affordable. William McKinley's 1898 Treaty of Paris was great in that it ended the Spanish-American War and got the USA some land for cheap. However, with the resulting Filipino War, arguably the worst war in American history, it cannot be McKinley's biggest success. That honor instead would go to McKinley's China Relief Expedition, in which about 500 American missionaries faced death in China due to the Boxer Rebellion, but were saved by McKinley sending in troops to save these missionaries from the Chinese attacks. In my opinion, Theodore Roosevelt's greatest success as president was the passing of the Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act, which promoted food and drug safety as well as not allowing misleading statements on product labels. These acts made food and drink much safer and more transparent in America. Howard Taft's greatest success, not Theodore Roosevelt's as president, was his work in busting trusts and ensuring competitive pricing to benefit customers. Taft brought up 70 antitrust cases in just 4 years in office, greatly surpassing Roosevelt's 40 he did in 8 years of office. Taft was the trust-busting president, not Roosevelt. Woodrow Wilson's biggest success was his labor policy. Wilson worked hard to fight child labor, signing multiple acts into law, only to be struck down by the Supreme Court. He also increased safety and security of the U.S. seamen with the Seamen's Act of 1915, which ended railroad strikes and reached legislature of an 8-hour workday for the railroad industry. Warren G. Harding's greatest success was also his labor policy. Harding did a phenomenal job handling labor strikes. Whereas most of his predecessors would send in the military, he instead would negotiate with the strikers, and each of the 3 biggest strikes he handled peacefully, despite constant support for sending in the militia to stop it. Instead, Harding made a government commission to look into the grievances, and in the case of the steel mill strike, through Harding's pressuring the leader of the steel mill and pairing it with the public outcry, caused the steel mill to be the last big industry to comply to the 8-hour workday. Calvin Coolidge's money accomplishments were phenomenal. He cut taxes from 73% to 30% among higher income individuals, and cut taxes by 25% for those who were lower income. Furthermore, he cut the national debt by a third, all while presiding over the best economical period of the Roaring Twenties. Despite how stellar the economy was, though, the impact of that is not as much of a long-lasting good as the signing of the Indian Citizenship Act, which extended citizenship status to every person born on the United States land, which was a great act that prevented present and future discrimination among different people groups. Hoover struggled greatly when it came to the economy and domestic policy, but his foreign policy was fantastic. Hoover was an anti-interventionist who wound down many of the unnecessary and harmful wars to both Americans and South Americans in Latin America. Hoover also signed treaties with other world powers limiting naval increases, both making the world potentially safer and causing less spending on the U.S. Navy. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's great success was obviously his leadership during World War II, stopping the fascist regimes in Japan, Italy, and especially Germany, which were crucial for humanity at large. And although there were some missteps like the internment of Japanese Americans, overall FDR kept U.S. morale high and led the Allied powers to destroy one of the worst regimes in the history of the world.